latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for September 27th. Well, here we are. We've been trying to figure out where everything is in terms of intensities, and we can confirm that Sam is still a Category 4, Mindulle a Cat 3, Gulab a tropical storm, and Peter, of course, is now being monitored for reformation this 27th day of September, day 270 of the worldwide season. Of course, 75 storms have formed so far this year. It's day 119 of Atlantic hurricane season, and of course the activity never ends. Sam a Category 4, Peter with a 50% chance of reformation now, and two areas of interest with 70% chances of formation. If these forms, this may as well take us to the end of the alphabet. It's day 135 of Eastern Pacific hurricane season, and after a really inactive period of activity, there is a new area of interest with the 20% chance of formation really being supported by the ensembles and the GFS currently. Moving on over to the Western Pacific, the only thing active here is Typhoon Mindulle, but it is a potent one given the fact that it is a, of course, major typhoon that is expected to brush by Japan in the coming days as a very powerful extratropical typhoon by the looks of things. In the North Indian Ocean, Gulab made landfall earlier as a 45-mile-an-hour storm and is slowly weakening as it heads further inland of the country, of course. Further weakening is expected, but there is a chance that it could reform in the Arabian Sea. We will see what happens with that storm. In the North Atlantic, you can see what's going on here, and it's very clear to make out Sam there. Pretty small storm by the grand scheme of things, but definitely noticeable. You can kind of see the tropical waves that will be helping to form our next two storms, and of course Peter sitting there to the east of a front. In the Eastern Pacific, you can't really see the disturbance that is going to be monitored for development, but of course it's been a pretty quiet month in terms of activity. Of course, only one named storm so far in September, although there may be some kind of shot that it does get to two before the month runs out in 4 days. In the Western Pacific, we have Mendul, which is a relatively large typhoon. It was doing pretty good as a Category 5 before it kind of collapsed in terms of its eye and weakened substantially as it got an eyewall replacement cycle in its midst there. So it's been an interesting day for Mendul. Good news for those that were hoping for it to weaken for sure. And in the North Indian Ocean, here is what we're looking at there. Of course, you can see Gulab as it made landfall. Not really looking too well organized, but bringing some heavy rain with it. And then, of course, behind it is some of that monsoonal activity filling in like normal. Of course, you can see a better idea of Mindulle, where it looked like a pretty good super typhoon last night, but has since deteriorated significantly as it did that eyewall replacement cycle of some sorts. It expected to strengthen a little bit back again up to a Category 4 before the JTWC expects this to become an extratropical Category 3 typhoon. Here are the sea surface temperatures in the Eastern Pacific. Here is what we're looking at. It's 28 to 29 degrees Celsius temperatures across the majority of the Eastern Pacific, so 30 degrees Celsius as you head near the Baja Peninsula. In the Atlantic, you can see the temperatures around 28 to 30 degrees Celsius for a majority of the basin. Of course, the immediate coastal areas of the Gulf Coast seem to be a little bit cooler. Same applies to the southeast U.S. Other than that, pretty much what we've been seeing, although it's interesting to note that those temperatures are really warm where those new area of interest are going into. In the North Indian Ocean, the temperatures are around 28 to 29 degrees Celsius in the Bay of Bengal, and the Arabian Sea, those are around 28 to 29 as well before it cools down as you head westwards. In the Western Pacific, you can see the temperatures are around 29 to 30 degrees Celsius for a majority of the basin, especially as you head east of the Philippines and near the equator. The southern hemisphere, of course, looking a little bit cool, given the fact that it is still the springtime there, fall up here in the northern hemisphere. Looking at our sea surface temperature anomalies, the El Nino La Nina, I should say, continues to make itself more pronounced. The Atlantic continuing to see those temperatures above average throughout the majority of the basin. Same applies to the Western Pacific, and the North Indian Ocean is looking with some areas spotty above average and some below average. But that is what we are looking at in terms of the sea surface temperatures. On this day in 1991, we had 4 systems active: Jimena, Kevin, Nat, and Maria would go on to become the costliest typhoon in history until Hagibis surpassed it in 2019. Nat was active and will continue its erratic track as Typhoon eventually, and Jimena and Kevin were storms that would eventually go out to peak as Category 4s. Of course, Jimena was post-peak. Kevin would eventually get to Category 4 as well. Nothing active in the Atlantic and nothing active in any of the other basins besides the Pacific ones. Of course, our On This Day products are sponsored by Cyclone History. You can find their tag below. Well, that brings us over to the next names. In the Atlantic, the last two names on the list are Victor followed by Wanda. Future names ensue with the auxiliary list starting with Adria. In the Eastern Pacific, we're looking out for Pamela and Rick, and in the Central Pacific, while vehicular mayhem may be going on with Rocket League, that mayhem is not enough to bring upon Hone. In the Western Pacific, we're looking at Lion Rock and Kompasu as the next two names there, and in the North Indian Ocean, the next two names now are Shaheen followed by Jawad. Moving on over to the southwestern Indian Ocean, of course part of the southern hemisphere there. The next two names now are Anna followed by Batsy Ray. In the Australian region, we're looking out for Patti and Ruby, and in the South Pacific, we're looking out for Cody and Dobie. We'll be back with another Tropical Weather Bulletin tomorrow night.